Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the Steinberg Halion 7 tutorial series. Today I'm going to show you how to configure the user interface. What you see here is almost entirely customizable. Halion 7 contains 26 different editors to give you different views of the application, and we can configure those editors in any way that we like and save them as things called screen sets. Up in the top left hand corner of the application we have this button that says Load, Save, Delete Screen Set. And you can see that my standard template is called Anthony Standard. I use this pretty much all the time. I like to have an absolutely stable work environment. Now I'm going to show you how to build this screen set from scratch today. I'll also make this preset file available to my Patreons and channel members. If you want to check out the links below, that's an awesome way to help support my channel. And if you don't want to go through the faff of configuring this for yourself, I'll make it available to you as a download. But we're going to build it from scratch today. And the best way to do that is actually to throw everything away and start from a completely clean slate. A nice easy way to do that is to choose the basic preset, which nearly gets us there. There's not very much user interface left at this point. On the left hand side, this curious looking thing is a trigger pads view, but we don't care. I'm going to click this little down arrow and close that down. These are some quick controls. Not interested at the moment. Let's close that as well. And I'm going to stop there. Just going to leave us with the keyboard in the bottom of the window. You see this little curtain. We can resize the keyboard as much as we want. Now when we finish configuring the user interface, I'm going to make sure that I can see C-2 at the left hand side and C8 at the top. I want to be able to see the entire keyboard. We'll worry about that much later. And now we're finally ready to start building our user interface. I mean, look at how empty it is. This stuff at the top is the actual core application. You can't get rid of these features. What you see in this little section at the top left-hand corner and these few controls, that's the core Halion interface. And so this is editor number 1. Let's add editor number 2. This little drop-down button at the top right-hand corner of the rectangle is where we're going to be able to configure our interface. And I'm going to split this view, this rectangle is called a view. I'm going to split it horizontally. Now that just put the keyboard on top. Let's make it a bit bigger. I want to invert these two views, and the way that you move a view is to head over to the top left-hand corner, just to the left of the view's label. This view doesn't have a label yet because we've not picked what kind of editor it's going to be, but we can still pick it up. I'm going to left click and then drag. And now I can pick this editor up and move it wherever I want. Thin orange lines means that when I drop it, it'll be added as a tab to the existing view. If you see a thick orange line, it's basically going to split. So this is exactly where I want to drop it because the new view, the currently unselected view, is now going to get dropped above the keyboard. Let's do that. Mission accomplished. And now I'm going to turn this into an actual editor. I want a media bay editor. So here's my media bay icon, single click. This is now a media bay view. And here is all our media bay functionality. So this is a perspective on the application. We're going to build 24 different perspectives on this application today. That was the second one. Now I've already loaded the sound into this instance of Halion, but it doesn't particularly matter if you want to do that as well. If you click on the tab view, and we'll make this a little bit bigger, here are all the different sound modules in Halion, and I'd picked the Halion Sonic SE Basic library, which everybody should have access to, and I've chosen the 1990s synth strings. So if you load that preset as well, you'll be able to follow along with this side by side. Now when I loaded that preset, I loaded it into a program. Programs are the kind of the core storage facility inside Halion. I want to be able to see my program table. That's where we've got all of our programs loaded. So I'm going to add a program table. This time I'm going to split my media bay vertically. So I'm going to head to my little drop down arrow, split vertically. It's going to put media bay on the left hand side. I'm going to move it to the right hand side, pick it up. And this time I want my thick orange line to be to the right of this select zone. Not all the way, just like that. Drop it. And I've inverted those two views, and this is where I'm going to create my program table. Not program tree, that's for somewhere else, program table. Editor number 3 successfully added. And here you can see the 1990s synth strings. In order for us to hear that program, it needs to be loaded into a slot. So programs are like your storage bay, but that storage bay needs to be accessed and instantiated. We load programs into slots. I'm going to deal with the actual architecture of Halion later, but suffice to say, we need to be able to see our slot table. I'm going to split up my program table horizontally, invert their order. I don't want the thick orange line to be right the way across the top of the application. I just want it to be above the program table. See the difference between those two thick orange lines? That's the one I want. And this is the first time I was basically waiting for this to happen. Sometimes when you drag and drop user interface elements in Halion, it duplicates them instead of moving them. I've never been able to consistently identify why, so I'm going to call it a bug, because I can't replicate this with any degree of certainty or consistency. If it ever happens and it duplicates your view, just close the one you don't want, head into your little drop-down window and say close. And that's effectively the same. A duplicate and then a close of the old one is the same as a move. It's annoying, but not the end of the world. So now above my program table, I want to select a slot rack. And here is the 1990s synth strings loaded into slot number 1. You get a lot of this default behavior without even worrying about it behind the scenes. Halion does as much intelligent stuff as it possibly can for you when you load a sound. So here's our program loaded into slot number 1. Now this left-hand collection of views doesn't want to occupy half the size of the interface. So I'm going to find my little curtain that allows me to drag these two interface elements, and I'm going to make it a bit smaller. 4 down, 20 to go. The next thing that we're going to do is divide the media bay vertically. I want the media bay to be pinned to the right hand side of my application, but I want a new window in the middle. So we head over to the media bay drop down, split vertically, and swap these two elements. And there we are. And now this main central view is going to be the biggest and most important area of the application. This is where I'm going to do most of my editing. And we're going to start by creating a zone editor. So this is our primary and most important view on Halion. This is where we're going to do the majority of our sound configuration. So the zone view wants to be nice and big. Because this central window is going to be so dominant in the final version of the screen set, this is where I want to load my most information intensive or important pages. One of the really important pages is the macro view. If you have a macro loaded, and we talked about this in episode 1, you get a brand new skin, a user interface that's designed specifically for a particular purpose. I want to be able to see that skin. I want to be able to see the macro interface, and I'm going to want to see it in this central window. So this view that currently contains only the zone is now going to do two different jobs. In other words, it's going to have tabs added to it. Head over to your little drop-down arrow and say create tab. And now you can see that zone and this undefined area editor are now a tabbed pair inside a single view. This is going to be my macro view. And here it is, macro page, not macro page designer. In fact, that's one of the only two editors that I don't have. I don't build my own macros. I want macro page. And now that we've selected it, here is the Halion Sonic SE standard macro. So if I press a note, here's the level control. You can see me interacting with that sound. Now I want this macro tab to be on the extreme left-hand side of my editor because it's such a high level, higher than any of the other user interface elements. I want it to be the first in the tab order. So I'm going to click on the tab itself and I'm going to drag it to the left of the zone. And you can see that little arrow. I could move it anywhere I wanted. It's just an editor like any other. But I want to drop it to the left of the zone tab. So that little arrow is telling me that that's the job done. Let go. And now the macro page is to the left of the zone page. The next three editors can be done really quickly because they're simply new tabs in an existing tab page. Can you see as soon as you've got more than one control in a view, got two tabs here, you get this little plus icon. So I can simply click that. And the third one is going to be my mixer. So once again, this is a very unique perspective If you're doing mixing on your sound, you can have very complex program trees with multiple buses. This is how we're going to interact with all of those buses. I want my mixer in the main view. Sometimes we're dealing with samples. And if we want to record our own samples, which is a very common thing to do in Halion, we're going to need a sample recorder. That's that job done. And finally, in this central main view, I want my options page. So these are application-wide configuration settings. Not going to worry about them today, but suffice to say, they are very important and they need to live at this top level of the hierarchy. So we've got 5 tabs in this main central view now. Let's head back over to the Zone tab. For the first time, I'm going to create nested views because what's currently called Zone is actually going to be my main edit page, and Zone is only one feature that's going to live in a much bigger collection that I'm going to call Edit. So effectively, I want to split this tab up and I want to have multiple tabs underneath. The way that I do that is right-click on the tab itself and I say Create Tab from here, not from the drop-down, from the actual tab itself. That's going to basically split that tab and put Zone one level lower. Now this new parent tab doesn't have a name yet. I want to call it Edit. And here you can see there's my Zone tab with its new sibling sat next to it. Into here, I'm going to add a sound editor. Now this is a very context-based thing. The sound editor is the page for all seasons. Whatever you've got selected in the application, from an editing perspective, the sound tab will do its very best to make some kind of meaningful context out of it. It's a very generic tool. And so for that purpose, I'm going to put it on the left-hand side of all of the edit pages. I'm going to pick up this tab and I'm going to drop it to the left of the Zone. And now we're going to create some new editor windows inside this main edit view. And there are quite a few editors that are going to live in this main area. The first one is going to be our sample editor, not the sample recorder, we've already got that one. Sample editor. If you have a sample-based sound, which we do here, you can see the sample. If you're dealing with wavetable-based sounds, you need a wavetable editor. Not the case here, but we do need the page. Many programs have MIDI modules attached to them, and so we need a MIDI modules editor. Difficult to say. There we go. And you can see some basic stuff that's appeared. Might not be populated with anything meaningful at the moment, but that doesn't really matter. When it needs to be, it will be. In addition to MIDI modules, we have a second MIDI page, which is where we configure the MIDI configuration of the program itself. So as you can see at the moment, this program is mapped across the entire keyboard. No matter what key I press, this you're going to hear sound out of it. But you can see I could quite easily reconfigure that so that only half the keyboard made sound. We'll worry about how and why another day. Next along, we have a page called Automation. Now, there are 2 different kinds of automation. There's automation. In this context, the word automation means Cubase's own internal mechanism for communicating with plugins. It's a Steinberg specific concept, and plugins have to be coded explicitly to handle VST automation. There's a secondary type of automation called MIDI continuous controller or MIDI CC data. This dates back to the very birth of the MIDI protocol, and it's a much more universal mechanism of automation. The 2 are perfectly valid, and we need to be able to see them both. What I've done so far is I've only created an automation, a Steinberg automation editor, but I want to drop this editor one layer below, just like I did with the Zone, and this is the only 3-level hierarchy I have anywhere in my setup. I'm going to create a new tab, right-click on the automation, dropping automation down 1 layer. I'm going to rename my parent tab Auto CC. And in this second tab, I'm going to select the MIDI control editor. So automation and MIDI continuous controller are the 2 ways that we can interact with Halion for our automation purposes. The final editor at this level, so we're going to have 8 in total, is going to be my mapping editor. And that's here. So as you can see, this is a sample-based sound, and you can see how the samples have been split up over the keyboard range. Now for some of the premium sample packages, you can end up with multiple samples for each individual note velocity layered. In this particular sound set, you can see that essentially one octave is served by a single sample. So each of the keys that I press inside this zone are all being served by the same sample, and they're being detuned by Halion's own kind of sample processor. We're going to need to be able to interact with all of that stuff, and so that's our 8th edit page. Now on your screen, depending on how big you have this central view, you might not be able to see them all. I'm going to pick up this curtain and drag them to the left, and eventually you'll see tabs start to disappear. If that happens, you'll get a little arrow, and then you can basically tab left and right through your editors. I have my default screen set configured such that I can see all tabs at all times. And when we get right to the end, where I've added all 24 editors in, I'll do some fiddling around with the interface to make sure that that's true. Just going to expand this out so that it's actually filling a bit more of the screen. Okay, editor number 18. I'm going to take this central view and I'm going to split it horizontally. And in the lower zone, I'm going to add in my quick controls. These were one of the small number of editors we had in our basic screen set right at the beginning. I'll add them back in now. They don't take up much screen real estate. As you can see, I can edit these two windows to make it an appropriate size. I want the vast majority of the screen space to be assigned to this upper window. Might as well drag this up to my top toolbar as well. Fill as much screen space as possible. Editor number 19 is going to be the program tree. We saw this in episode 1. This is the means by which we can interact with individual elements inside the designed program. I have my program tree in a tab with this right-hand section. So I'm going to add a new tab element to the media bay. And I'm going to select program tree. And here it is. And if we drill down, you can see these individual samples in this mapping table, different views on the same information. Back over to the media bay. Media bay is all very well and good. If you want to load presets, that's how you do it. But sometimes you're going to want to access physical files on your hard drive if you're, for instance, loading a sample. Well, that's functionally related to the media bay. So I'm going to create a new tab called load, and I'm going to put media bay and the browser in subtabs. So I'm going to right click on media bay and I'm going to say create tab, and I'm going to rename the parent tab load, and media bay's sibling is going to be called browser. So this is how we'll access physical files. This is how we'll load presets. Editor 21 is another one of those that we saw right at the beginning. I'm going to put my trigger pads back in. Now I own a Native Instruments machine and I'll quite frequently use 8 of the pads on that thing to interact with Halion. I want to be able to see them all the time. Very similar to the quick controls, I want to be able to see those all the time as well. But it's quite a small user interface element, and I find that it sits perfectly well underneath the program table. So I'm going to split the program table. In this lower view, I'm going to select trigger pads, and there they are. As you can see, there's no trigger pads actually assigned to this thing. Not going to worry about that for today. It's there when we need it. The final 3 editors are kind of also rans. I don't consider them to be particularly important, but I'm going to add them anyway, just for the sake of completeness. And I'm going to add them as tabbed elements to this table, the program table. The first of the editors is an undo history. Scroll down to the bottom. There it is. So we can see every operation that we've performed today. Here's the history of all of those actions. We have a tagging editor called tags, where we can see information, in this case about the preset that's been loaded. And finally, just make this curtain a bit bigger, we have a parameter list. This is another context-based specific thing where every time I select an element, you can see unique information about that element being highlighted in the parameters list. I'm going to rename that params. I don't know why the word list has been added on at the end, it annoys me. So now the 24 editors that I use on anything like a regular basis have been configured. I want to make sure that all of my window sizes are exactly how I want them to be. This left-hand view, and this is one of the reasons why I renamed params list. I want this view to be as narrow as possible. So you can see there's a moment when one of those tabs disappears. I'm going to carry on dragging it until that's not the case anymore. That's how big I want that window to be. In terms of resizing windows, if you press the Control key down, it resizes only the two windows that the curtain is directly adjacent to. If I take my finger off that Control key and I do the same resize, you could see the trigger pads window underneath also resizing. So it's kind of everything gets done proportionally. Press the Control key down again and only the two adjacent windows work. That's also true for the outside border of the application. So if I pick up this border and drag, everything shrinks. If I press the Control key down and drag, then only the right-hand panel, only the right-hand view is affected. So I want to get all of these windows just the right size. My program table and slot rack want to be about 50-50, and my trigger pads underneath are quite small. So I'm happy with them. I want to make sure I can see all 8 tabs in my editor view. And this right-hand pane actually needs to be moved. I want this right-hand view to be the full height of the entire application. So I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to start dragging it around. You can see all of these orange lines. I want the thick orange line to extend the entire height of the application. You see, there it is. Drop it. And there's one of those duplicate bugs again. It's just basically, I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to close the old one. Let's bring that back into view. The width of this right-hand zone I configure using my media bay because I want to be able to view 3 collection tabs in the same editor, and that gets me to the perfect width for that zone. Head over back to my program tree. Everything is nicely visible. It's just a nice size. I find that works really well. Oh, look at that, you little rascal. That left-hand view's just got a bit small, didn't it? There we go. Bring my params back in. Take your eye off the interface for a second and something will shrink. The keyboard at the bottom of the view, I want to make sure that I can always see C-2 and C8, and I can, so I'm perfectly happy with that. But I'm just going to hold the Control key down. As you can see, I can shrink and zoom into the keyboard to make sure that it's covering as much of this zone as possible. I want it as big as possible within the confines of the interface that I've assigned to it. And finally, I want to select the default views that I want for all of these pages. Program table is the most important in that zone. Edit zone is the most important central view. And I'm constantly changing my mind as to whether or not the media bay or the program tree is the most important, but for now I'll say it's the program tree. I've got everything exactly how I want it to be. Up into the screen set, save, and now I'm perfectly happy to overwrite that preset. And that's the job done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.